A revenue systems expert and pipeline acceleration strategist, our next guest has helped scale sales organizations beyond £10 million, dollars, euros in revenue with precision and efficiency. As VP EMEA at ConnectAndSell and the creator of Pipeline OS, he brings deep expertise in turning outbound teams into predictable, scalable growth engines that we all want. He's a regular speaker at CRO Connected and host of the Sales Mall podcast. He knows what it takes to build high-performing sales organizations in today's market. Welcome to Leadership That Sells. This is the podcast that helps you lead first and sell more. Great sales teams need great leaders, but too often sellers become managers without the right training. And that is why we built the Leadership That Sells playbook course to share just what leaders need and no more. 2 30-minute live expert-led sessions a week over 9 weeks with coaching clinics over on top. Check it out at the Practical Leadership Academy. Gerry Hill, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Now, absolute pleasure. I think I might have to buy your course after that. That sounded pretty compelling.
Fabulous. MECE rates, of course. That was a far too concise history, potted history. What did I miss?
What did you miss? Masses and masses of failure. I think that's a big thing.
Failure.
Just a lot of it, a steaming iceberg of failure. No, I think the leadership question is one that I sort of ingest a lot. My family context, my dad was an army officer for X number of years and then went into the corporate world at IBM. I played professional rugby, and one of the things I find that most people get wrong about sales leadership and sales system design, and you mentioned it in our pre-chat, is this sort of concept of homogeneity and shared value, shared mission, and ultimately most sales teams are in it for themselves, and you need to kind of be able to adapt and react to that. So I think that that's something I've definitely noticed. And then I was in preparation for today trying to come through a list of all the people I've worked for, and my mentors have never been my direct sales leadership or the sales leadership within the organizations that I've worked for. It's always been subject matter people or CEOs or COOs, or, the people that sort of design the content and understand problems. I've never really gone to any of my sales leaders and gone, wow, you're an inspirational figure, let me learn from you. And it's quite an interesting dichotomy, that, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's an interesting one, because then you're doing your job, you're in in the room doing your job, but you can see out there that person's doing something interesting, or that person's doing something interesting. I want to learn from them. And curiosity is one of the big things that I always hire for.
Yeah, always. Yeah, I mean, it's an intrinsic element. It can be measured. You can understand whether or not somebody's got a good range of questions they want to ask. And, we just hired a new rep into our team, and I was speaking with my counterpart in America who is responsible for our post-customer work. And he said to me, I really like this guy. And I went, what about him do you really like? Because it was a very emotional response. And he went, he just gets it. He's so curious. He won't stop asking me questions. And 9 months down, he's our number one rep across all lead indicators and revenue and his incessant curiosity around offer, product, market fit initiatives never goes away. And he's constantly in touch with me. His proactivity is insane.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot to learn in that. You don't need to be the most polished person, I think. But I think if you've got inherent curiosity, you can cover a lot of skill gaps pretty much immediately. I think that's what we want to screen for, right?
There's an edge to that. And I'm sure that the people listening to this are nodding along, and there's no questions there. So we could go into, yes, curiosity is good because, I'm sorry, if you think curiosity is good because you're listening to the wrong thing. The edge, I think, to that is there's the piece that says a fool can ask enough questions to keep 100 wise men busy for years, right? So you can ask stupid questions, or you ask the same question again and again. Now, and I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with answering the same question, because you want to get the right answer, not the first answer. But when you said it can be measured, tell us, how would you measure curiosity in an interview, in a meeting, something like that?
I think people are very generic in their question sets, especially in the world of AI, where you can pretty much prep for any scenario, anytime, anywhere.
What keeps you awake at night? Stupid questions like that.
Yeah, it's the it's the curiosity that happens in a conversation, not the curiosity that you can prepare and curate and battle test yourself against. It's the I listened to something you said. I'm going to ask you a question against that very specific point that hopefully you've never heard before.
Mm.
Those are the things that I think where you get true breakthrough curiosity. Everything else is just a little bit of anathema, isn't it? It's like everyone has their standardized set of 24 questions that they're told by the headhunter to put together. And not everybody can infuse that with the next question that comes off the natural flow of conversation, like the one you and I are having right now.
Mm.
And the fact that you paused when there's an edge to that, there's a perspective, there's an opinion, and then but I'm still deeply curious about learning more about the thing that you just said. That for me is the sort of real sign of somebody that's willing to interrogate and learn and rapidly prototype an idea or a belief that they've got in their own head. Possibly shows that they don't have self-limiting records as well, which is probably one of the biggest issues in self-performance, generally speaking. You know, the kind of bullshit trash that tells you you can't call people on a Friday afternoon because they're in the pub. You know, those types of conceits. And I think the people that believe that are also the people that ask pro forma questions and talk about how good their process is and tell you stories about themselves, but they're never actually constantly sort of feeding back by saying, well, what about this? What have you learned about that? What have you done about it? What's the gap? How does it make you feel? You know, those are the guys and the girls that ultimately are going to win and succeed. Right? So, and easier to manage. I'd rather have somebody overwhelm me with questions and be demanding of time as a leader than the alternative, which is the person that's ultimately disengaged. So yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic for sure.
And likewise, you'd rather have somebody complain about something than sitting quietly. You know?
Yeah, because your job, my belief in all leadership, regardless of function, is you've got the major job is to remove blockers that prevent people from doing effective work. So if you don't see the hurdles because you're occupied with other elements of your job, you need people who can be the canary in the coal mine and be like, tug you on your arm like a little 4-year-old going, this problem still hasn't been solved, this hasn't been solved, this hasn't been solved, what are you going to do about it? You know, I like that.
Yeah. It's same with customers. You know, if you've got a customer who's going quiet on you, it's never good news. You know, I haven't spoken for them for 6 weeks, but I'm sure it's fine. It's not, believe me, it just isn't. You know, that's
yeah. You've got to overwhelm people with over communication, and that's up and down, I think. And I think that's where most people win. I think most people just assume a lot of bullshit and just assume that everything's what they want it to be based on their mental state and their belief system at that moment and the effort that they're willing to apply to something, right? So
yeah. And if you don't over communicate, they'll make it up.
yeah, definitely.
They'll fill up the talk track. You know, they'll fill the talk track in their own heads with all the bad news that they can imagine.
Yeah, and then catastrophization and stuff happen, you know. And then there's no sort of frank accountability as a result, is there? You know, people just leap to a conclusion about something that they've misinterpreted. And I've been guilty of that in middle layers of leadership before, where something wasn't told to me perfectly. I put my own filter on it. I distribute that news somewhere else in a different way. And then all of a sudden it sort of diluted its way back through the hierarchy. And it's so far away from the actual truth. It's insane. So you're responsible for being like a chain effect in Chinese whispers.
Yeah, totally.
And I think even though it's a bit cliche, I still like what Benioff does at Salesforce with V2 Mom every year. I think that's probably one of the most ways to articulate leadership as an exercise and grab organizational understanding of what objectives are than any other framework I've ever seen.
I think most people are either OGSMing or OKRing or something like that, but the V2 Mom is quite an interesting little model.
I struggle with OKRs because they seem a bit too obvious, and I think they can be a bit patronizing to certain groups of people, especially in smaller companies. I get it in bigger businesses, but I love V2 Mom because you can build a lot around missions and objectives and values and stuff. You can go a huge, long way with that if you're not in a very big ship, you know. Whereas I think OKRs are more sort of operational, aren't they? They're geared towards things that are already working on some element of efficiency today.
And if there's any consistency in any of the businesses that I've worked in, no, things are not working. That's why they called me. You know, it's all going to shit. Can you come and fix it, please? Okay, right. Yeah, and here's our 15-page mission guide. Really? All right then. How much money are you making? £2.50. Let's just put that to one side for the moment, shall we?
Well, missions work if there are incentives that drive towards the mission. And I think that's the other big sort of reckoning I've had over the past 5.5 years is in sales culture and sales leadership. Incentives are wildly misaligned with the job to be done.
Mm.
And, reps don't need quotas, they need missions. They need quests and they need heroes' journeys and they need all these other things,
Yeah.
but they don't need quarters and months and other things.
Well, yeah, I mean, these are the misalignments, the sort of inherent misalignments we have in the businesses that we lead. In that I have no choice but to report quarterly, monthly, daily, hourly, weekly
But
to
yeah,
the board because the bloody want to know, the investors want to know when am I getting my money back, by how much.
but
But
the actual people executing the job don't need that story.
they
They
don't need
just,
that.
you can repackage it in a way that's fun, compelling, exciting, and makes doing hard work easy for them
Yeah.
or pleasurable, right? And this isn't some sort of soft, lily-livered woke thing that I'm thinking through. It's an actual, there is a difficult job to be done. We're over promising you on based on outcome, not on process adherence and route to getting the job done. There's a reason why certain people consistently go to President's Club and certain people don't. What's the disconnect there? And I think that that's the big issue that most people are failing on right now. And the other big paradigm problem that I'm seeing is just buddy leadership. Like it's just this friendship leadership, and it's not helping anybody right now in any way, shape, or form. And I've seen a lot of failure on our programs at ConnectAndSell because of that one inherent problem, which is who's actually getting people to do the work. People don't do the work of their own recognizances, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So how do you create systems for that? And that's where I've been spending most of my intellectual capital the past 24 months is how do I rebuild sales cultures which are obsessed over the elements of process that actually instill excellence and execution, as opposed to I'm doing my job if I'm loading 50 people into a sequence and pressing go on a spam count. Like, there seems to be just a very, very, very big break between reality and expectation and what people are expected to do with the labor costs that we fund into them. And I think that it's a really bad state of affairs, frankly, as a result.
So the title of these episodes, and we'll come up with something good for this one, I'm sure, is always a how to insert useful thing here. And I think you just nailed it. How? We know then there's a gap. How do you deliver the former?
Yeah, so I think if you look at anybody with any real sort of rigor in the world, there's always sort of science as inspiration, right? Sales is a bit of a weird content pillar because it's the humanities project for most people.
Hmm.
Most people like focusing on the art of it, not the actual science of it most of the time. Talk track, skills, um, how to sort of get people to think the way that you do fast. But actually, it's quite boring, rigorous, and process oriented work to do it in any reasonable way. And that's not fun for most people to get into sales, right? Most people get into sales are probably functionally dyslexic or dyspraxic in some way on a continuum. They're not particularly good at, analytical work, but they're very good at sort of reasoning and talking and so on. So that's the parts of the job that we should be focusing on. And then if you look at the overlays for expert guidance and advice and coaching, it's generally from that sort of discovery to close
Hmm.
element where most people insert their enablement initiatives. And then weirdly, where pipeline is probably the most important thing for companies to become durable and
Hmm.
resilient and predictable. And there's a massive gap there in how do we structure work for people that's meaningful. And for some reason, we overlay that as tactical work when it's actually deep strategy. It's the first place our company makes contact with the market. And yet we do all the wrong things consistently. So the framework's pretty simple. It's a management consulting principle called mutually exclusive, comprehensively exhaustive. So if Rolls-Royce goes to McKinsey, for example, and says, we want you to analyze sub-Saharan Africa for the alternative generator market in utility scale power. Very niche, very boring. You think, okay, that doesn't sound like a difficult problem to solve. But actually, even for something that niche, there's a rigor to it. So mutually exclusive. Well, what are the countries in sub-Saharan Africa?
Right.
Okay, well, now we've identified the fact that there's 17 of those countries. Instead of analyzing the general thesis, it's like, right, we're going to look at Angola exclusively. with this set of rigorous questions that can be applied to every country. And then we're going to analyze that in and of itself. And then at the end of that exclusive analysis of all of those 17 different countries, we can now start to tie together trends, but it's based on the fact that each segment of this work is universally interesting to that segment of the work. One of the big things that we kind of do in sales development, particularly, or pipeline development, is we kind of cross threads. We take an initiative, we cross it with another initiative, and all of a sudden,
track anything. No idea what you're doing.
track or learn from any of that. And then the other thing that I think is an overriding point of failure is what I call talk track freedom, specifically in and around cold calling for reps to create their own stuff constantly. And that's where you generally see the rep drift from high performer to low performer. And nobody's actually learning beneficially from any of that because there are a whole range of cultural things. And then you don't necessarily have a management overlay that's sufficient for maintaining the rigor needed to get good outcomes. Now, good outcomes isn't always meetings, by the way, right? It could be referrals, it could be leading conversations and learnings and, loops and feedback, right? Outbound's got a significant high value for more than feedback. Just objective. Right?
Yeah.
So here's the framework. Imagine I'm a cyber vendor. I've got 5 avatars that I can sell to. Monday, I go mutually exclusive on one function of the market with the cyber. Tuesday, I go mutually exclusive on the next. Wednesday, I go mutually exclusive. I don't enable my reps to make any decisions at that point. The lists are pre-built, the scripting's pre-built, the time block for the execution's pre-built, the follow-up blocks are pre-built. But I do give them some leeway towards the end of the day to sort of inherit their learnings, discuss those learnings with each other, figure out what could have been done better, and then potentially give them the opportunity to go and execute with their own stuff and measure the contrasts. Then I do that repeatedly all the way up until the end of the week. Now, that's pretty boring work, frankly, but it's important work. So the real sort of nuance around it is beyond just the management rigor, is the how do I make it fun? And this is where gamification can actually lurch forward from what its potential has been to what it could be in the future. So the big compensation triggers are generally going to be points-based as opposed to outcome-based. And this is one of the things that most people do. How do I compensate for pipeline? Well, if I'm a specialist pipeline seller, call them an SDR or whatever you want, they're getting comped on meetings or revenue. And in most instances, both of those things aren't particularly equal or fair. And nobody's ever looking back at behaviors. So how did you get there? How many referrals did you get? How many conversations did you follow up on? Did you execute your follow-ups? Did you follow up with the referrals, et cetera, et cetera? Did you phone into a switchboard to get a prospect's mobile phone number if you couldn't find it in Zoom? All of a sudden, you've got this overlay of behavioral elements that are 1, 2, 3, 4 points in a system where your entire month's additional OTE is dependent on a points-based scheme. And all of a sudden, you're starting to bake in and wire in the behaviors that separate the top performers who seem to be doing it off talent exclusively and everybody else in the pack. And then behaviors build better sellers, generally speaking. Now you're going to apply rigor to that process. So you're taking boring but important work, you're making it fun, you're creating mechanisms and systems within the work week that are defined must-do non-negotiables, but you're still finding frameworks that give back freedom of creativity and expression of thought and strategy back to people in and around the system. And the gamification piece is essentially one of the best ways to incentivize adults, especially in those sort of disparate, conflicting forces most people seem to experience. And then the more mature and senior the seller, you kind of de-restrict certain elements of it, but you make any of the pipeline incentives that built into their plan part of the gamification process. You still wire their work into the mutually exclusive frameworks, but they just do less of it because they've got other things to do. But I think that it's that kind of construct of how work is done, which is the biggest opportunity for people to start questioning their pipeline development initiatives.
Yeah,
more and more. The answer at the moment seems to be, and I'll say this as a tech vendor into the space, the answer seems to be more tech, more data, more tools, more people, or no people. My AEs need to do this, and nobody seems to have a solid answer. But every time I implement this, the growth potential and the system rigor and the management development that happens as a result is huge. And I think the last inspiration point beyond the management consulting rigor, how to analyze and execute, is actually inspired by the stuff that our colleagues in development and software engineering execute on. You know, they use agile, they've got continual feedback loops.
Sprints.
They're always being open-minded about sprint execution. So each of these motions, each campaign's a sprint. A rep can become a scrum master for the day. They can take ownership of how a sprint's developed and run. So long as it stays within the parameters that the leadership ordains, after a while, it becomes very, very autonomous. And on the job, you're training your leaders how to run programs that are sophisticated and complex, not just you were the highest performing rep 2 quarters ago. We've just lost your manager. Can you do the job, please? Which is the status quo we've all lived in for our entire career.
Yeah, totally.
So that's thinking. And then it's not then about tech investments. It's then not about process investments. It's about being able to comprehensively analyze your market as a function of your strategy on a daily basis every time you interact with the market. And as a CEO or a leader, I need that information. Today, I'm waiting for that information 3 months, 4 months, 6 months from today because the data's catching up. And I've got to employ more people to do that work for me because I don't know how to jockey around on Power BI. All right. So that for me is the biggest innovation you can make, which is the least radical innovation. It's not new technology. It's not new anything. It's reverting to a very structured work product that actually trains and builds high quality television.
Where have you seen this done well?
Yeah, we've had a look at it at Software AG. They did a phenomenal job with it. Had a look at it in a couple of other private companies. My main route march here is sort of combined with ConnectAndSell plus what the work that we do in private equity. So we can't really disclose a lot of those companies, but private equity is always looking for ways to maximize labor value. So
what's the edge? Yeah,
I mean, it is an edge, right? It's an alpha source for them. And for those not familiar with alpha, it's the trade investment industry term for profit, right? So, you know, and it's got a source of competitive advantage for a long time because it's the kind of process that it'll take a long time to drag an entire market behind it. It's not like repeatable revenue, which is probably why we're failing in the way that we are today. Nobody's adapted it for a while. You know, everybody lives in that like it's a Bible, but it's definitely not fit for modern purpose, right? So yeah, it's an interesting framework, but I think the key point for me is it's about getting managers leading again and doing it in a way where they're not scared or brittle about how to deal with humans. Because the second you put a system in place, the system becomes the guardrail. Your behavior drives the leadership as a result of the system. And I see so much go wrong because nobody's got a system. And when you don't have something to fall back on, where does the accountability layer sort of land for you? So that's the real issue, I think, is system. And I know when something's failing because they've invested in too much technology, by the way. I'll go in and look at an SDR team of about 15 people and they're spending, you know, probably 20,000 a year a rep. That's a broken pipeline system immediately on that.
Yeah. And you got to wonder sometimes, could they just not spend not spend that and just use the money in something else?
Yeah, well, it's not even that. And I don't blame anyone, by the way, because we've come out of a sort of paradigm shift, which was the engagement culture. But actually, engagement's had this weird inverse effect, which is it worked for a while, like all things do. People built products and businesses out of it, in fact, billion-dollar companies and businesses. But it had the alarming effect of making it far too easy for people to engage with prospects. Right?
Yeah.
I sort of said to prospects, you know, I need to move away from it. So, you know, without the discipline of running those automations well, you've kind of created a generation of people that don't understand actually how to systemize anything. And that's a big, big problem.
And I mean, even that, the concept of systems thinking to build a system is something that a lot of people just don't. And it's not complex. It just takes a bit of, take an afternoon on a whiteboard, in fact, a couple of hours on a whiteboard, and I'll walk you through it, right? But I think my old boss used to say, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, that having a plan is better than having no plan. Even if the plan is shit, having a plan is better than having no plan, because then you're doing something in an order. And it's the order of operations that counts. And equally, having a system is better than having no system. Even if the system's poor, there's something there you can build on, you can point to and say, that's not working, let's change it.
The best leaders I know, Paul, all have operating rhythm at the core of their thinking.
Yeah,
So
13
got
weeks,
like
13-week
yeah,
cadence.
yeah, you've got a layer which is inspire and activate and measure. And then you've got this operating rhythm piece, and the people that can make people work inside the rhythm well and effectively and understand the rules of engagement
Mm.
and got total clarity ultimately outperform everybody else. And I don't think it's any coincidence that actually the best chief revenue officers in the world don't come from a classical sales and marketing background.
Mm.
They're
Engineers.
ex-bankers or they're ex-corporate finance guys or
Mm.
they're ex-consultants and so on. And they've just been taught how to think critically, but there's something about revenue which has attracted them to it. And they've also been taught formally how to lead, which
Yeah.
is the other sort of big thing because nobody's really been taught how to lead. People either have it or they don't, seems to be the big conceit, even in
And it's
2025.
and they're learned skills. In fact, they're not even skills. They're sometimes it's just tactics. There's a set of 5 questions you can ask, and all of a sudden your team's working better. Really?
Yeah,
Totally true.
exactly. But people just, I think it's all charisma all of the time. Right?
Yeah. Rah rah.
But you
Mm.
can't sustain it either.
No.
At some point, that's going to get exposed.
No,
And
absolutely.
the rebound effect, the ball against the wall effect, there is the rise of the sort of fairly kind of soft, sycophantic servant leadership, which servant leadership clearly has its place in all
Mm.
things, but it's gone far too far the other way, which is yeah, okay, whatever.
This is the thing. Now, my basis, my grounding for servant leadership. I mean, I'm a practicing Christian. I believe all these wonderful things, and the servant leadership I see in Jesus himself. Right? He was good. He wasn't nice. There was
No,
nothing nice about the man. Right? Where he went, nasty things happened. Right? All of his followers died horrible deaths. Right? He wasn't a nice person. This is servant leadership. It's about making other people successful for their own sake, despite themselves, right? So there's nothing woo-woo softy about that at all.
no, no,
So
you don't have to like people, but you kind of got to respect them, and you've got to buy in, and you've got to be willing to go on the mission because it aligns with you
that's it.
well.
That's
You
it.
know, and I think looking at the military stuff, it's interesting to see the sort of shifts in how they teach command and control. It used to be quite ideological,
Mm,
like let's go beat the commies and all the rest of it, and made it quite personal. The Americans still follow that doctrine to a certain degree, but now it's much more sort of system focused, and it's about asking questions so that people can design their own
mm.
mission. And I think that problem solving is an inherent part of leadership and the ability to enable people to solve their own problems.
What
And I
are
think
our
that,
options? What are our options?
yeah, and actually, the VP at one of my competitors said something really good the other day that got me thinking. Like, I'm here to build world-class sellers, but I'm not here to parent them.
Yeah,
And you kind of have to let people make their own mistakes. You can't white knight. White knight's a big symptom of
hmm,
corporate failure right now.
yeah, totally. I mean,
No,
it
it's not.
has its place. I mean, you look at the different
Well, you
sides.
need it sometimes.
You do. You need a turnaround. You need the White Knight to come in on the Charger,
Saves
slay
the
the
same.
dragons, and
All
then
right.
build it up again.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
job.
But it's yeah, and I don't think anybody's actually thinking about how can we build CEOs from this company.
No.
And I think that that's a problem of mindset for a lot of people. Whatever. So yeah, and I think there's an over-indexing of individual contributors with leadership job titles now.
Mhm.
Everybody's a VP or a CRO, but actually most of them are still carrying a quota of 50% of their time.
Yeah.
How do I sort of distribute time and leadership efforts accordingly? So yeah, there's a lot of roles.
There's an entirely different conversation there about player coaches. I hate player coaches. You can't. I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
think
not
you
going to
can.
do it a bit at the moment, but that's because everybody in our business
Yeah.
doesn't have value to a company like ConnectAndSell. The professional management pieces, and in our DNA or in our company, so
That's
you
a
kind
thing.
of have to find it out. But I do personally struggle with that.
Yeah, that's a thing. We
Well, I
could
guess
go
what my
on.
player is versus my coach role. So yeah,
We could leave this for hours. If I asked you if there was one message you wanted to paint on the billboards of every town in every country on earth, what would that one message be you would leave people with?
good question. Um, nuclear energy will save the world. No, I'm being facetious.
That'll do.
I am being facetious. I think it's you don't need other people to make you a profession. You can do a lot of that yourself in 2025. So if you feel like you're getting complete neglect on developing a leadership skill and you've been put in this role, go out and find the information yourself. Seek out your own mentors, pay your own money. There's no reason why people can't level up off their own resources in 2025.
Yeah.
It's not the company's responsibility to build you, it's your responsibility to build you.
You are the CEO of yourself.
Okay.
Cracking. Gerry Hill, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Pleasure.